I feel that we ought to have sound effects on QUBE. I feel the need for a drum roll. I'm going to introduce you to Pete Jarvis, and this is where we need the drum roll. Pete has 27 years of experience in financial services IT. 18 years were at JP Morgan as well, and he was also a joint founder of a very successful software startup. He recently led the JP Morgan Agile and Ops Centers of Excellence, and he's currently working with Deloitte UK. So, Pete, over to you.
Yeah, so in about 20 years ago, a bunch of sort of software gurus got together in a ski lodge in the US and started to try and define how they could solve this problem that Simon went through, which is sort of a big bang approach, which basically led business stakeholders to cram everything they possibly could into a release because they knew that release might take 12 to 18 months to arrive. Consequently, lots of software was developed that was never used because either it was never going to be used or things changed in the intervening period. So massively inefficient way of doing software projects. So this group of people got together and they came up with what's called the Agile Manifesto, which some of you may have heard about. And there are 4 key tenants in the manifesto. And what we're going to do is I'll go through them now at sort of relatively high level, and then we're going to break up into groups and discuss our own experiences of each of those. So you get to choose which of these 4 you sort of jump into a specific room, which will get you used to using this environment to collaborate, as well as some discussions on your own experiences. Doesn't have to be Agile experiences, it could just be where you suffer the issues that Agile is trying to solve. And then we'll get back together at the end and sort of discuss it, and then we'll move on to this next session of the today's sort of meeting. So the 4 main sort of tenets of the Agile Manifesto are it's phrased in the left-hand side versus the right-hand side, and the key word is over in the middle of that. It's not to say that you don't do anything on the right-hand side. So in the very first one, it talks about individuals and interactions between them are more important than processes and tools. That doesn't say that processes and tools don't have a place in software development, but we think that the left-hand side is more important. The next one is around working software over comprehensive documentation. Number 3 is customer collaboration over contract negotiation, and 4 is responding to change over following a plan. So I'll just move on to the next slide. Just to let you know as well, actually, it's quite different in this environment. I fell foul of this when I first used it. I wanted to see what the previous slide was. So anyone who clicks on the navigation will change it for everybody. This isn't your local copy of the presentation. So just sort of don't go back to the previous one because it's going to change it for everyone. Although, as I said, I did that a couple of times the first time I was in this environment. So the first of the sort of the values is talks about interpersonal communication. That's also where this environment can really help, and hopefully we can talk about that later on. We don't think that communicating via sending documents and emails and waiting, days, etc. We don't think that's the best way of getting stuff done, and importantly, getting the right stuff delivered. That seems to be a recipe for misunderstanding, giving the wrong software delivered, and lots of sort of weights in the chain. So that's what this first value is all about. The second value, moving on to page 5, working software is the key measure of success. Comprehensive documentation, depending on what kind of project you're in, it may be that you need a lot of documentation and that to be signed off, but we feel that the actual software is where the rubber hits the road. So don't spend too much time on documentation for the sake of it. Use just enough documentation to get the job done and iterate it. Don't necessarily do it all up front. Do as much as you can to get the development team running, and then during the flight of the project, increase that documentation if you have to. Documentation.
And sorry, Pete, just a question for you. If you're running just a business project, so it's not software focused,
yes,
the same principles still apply.
Yeah, they do. I mean, there's actually a business enhancement to the Agile Manifesto, which takes these sort of principles and extrapolates them into a business context. So it takes out the IT bit, but it's basically saying that, do not think that creating documentation and sign off and controls is actually delivering product. That gives zero value to the end customer. The end customer needs business solutions. It needs, software solutions. It needs physical artifacts rather than designs of physical artifacts. So that's just a key sort of principle to keep in mind, that in some industries you do need a lot of documentation. There'll be regulations, or where there's a healthcare, or projects that are delivering sort of safety systems, and there are certain standards you need to follow. But just be careful that you don't get sucked into just spending the whole time writing documents and not writing end products. Documents go stale very quickly. So it's to really concentrate on delivering value for the customer rather than internal artifacts. Number 3 is customer collaboration over contract negotiation. So the 3 and 4 are sort of slightly related. This really talks about the fact that during the life cycle of projects, things do change. Requirements come in, people change their minds, technologies improve, new regulations sort of get spawned that put spanners in the work. So when that happens, it's inevitable. Don't spend the whole time going back to the original contract and saying, well, we agreed 6 months ago that we deliver X, so we're going to hold you to it, or we're going to take another month, delay the project for a month while we renegotiate and all that sort of thing. So this is really collaborate with the customer, between the delivery team and the customer, in a software environment or non-software. Have that person embedded within your team if you can, dealing with them on a daily basis, build up relationships. So don't sort of communicate via documents FedEx across the world with signatures on it. So to really collaborate closely, and that will give the customer trust in you, and vice versa, much quicker time to market, and so on and so forth. So that's really what number 3 is talking about. And number 4 is, as I mentioned, related to that. So when there's a change, don't stick to your plan. Accept the fact that change happens, it's inevitable, and the Agile, there's a phrase that we use called change on a dime for a dime. So really nimbly change direction very cheaply. So that's what number 4 is all about. So don't get stuck into, well, if we want to change, we have to go back to basics, we have to undo what we've started, we have to cancel a project and spin up another one. Just accept it, try and work around it, and collaboratively work with your customers and the delivery team to embrace that change. If you avoid change in a nimble fashion, what you get is what I mentioned earlier on, which is the customer knowing that they're going to have to ask for every single piece of requirements in the product, because they know that once the product's getting built, whether it's software or not software, there's no way of changing course. So then you end up with these huge lengthy projects of which only a small fraction is ever used. So that is that is a waste for everybody. So, but the reason that people do that is because they are fearful of change, and change is expensive. So basically, it's just saying embrace change. It's helpful. And doing things in short iterations, obviously, if you do it in software, you might do a 2 or 3 week sprint, deliver something, show it to the customer, and he or she can then say, yep, that's good, or no, we need to change it. So you've only ever got 2 weeks away from, and you have 2 weeks wasted, really. So that's the Agile Manifesto. And I said we're going to break into 4 groups in a second, and then each of you can choose one that you either have succeeded in using, or something that you're particularly finding troublesome, and then sort of facilitators and yourselves can talk about it and come up with some sort of plans to address those. I won't really go into the next slide, but you will have heard in the software world there's frameworks such as Scrum and Kanban and Safe and Less, etc. They're all great, but the key thing is what we call being Agile, not doing Agile. So don't get sort of sucked into the easy trap of thinking you're Agile if you've got Scrum and stand-ups and a Kanban board on your shop floor. They're great, but you need to think about what Agile means, and that really is going back to those four values and saying, are we actually following those? Do we embrace change? Do we collaborate? And so on. And the last point is what I spoke about at the beginning, is that nowadays agility is moving away from just being a technical aspect into something across the whole business. So finance, business, controls, risk, compliance, etc. And as a consultant at Deloitte, we're seeing most of our customers asking for help in that area. A lot of development shops are pretty mature in using, Scrum and Kanban and being agile, but there's not a lot of experience out there in how agility can help all areas of the business. So that's something that we're seeing a lot of demand for. And that's it.
That's great stuff. Thank you, Pete.
Yep.
So
okay, sorry about the comms.
No, that's been good. I think we now want to actually hear to some collaboration, hear what everybody's experience, and since based on the numbers we have here today, we're going to focus on three areas of the Agile that you've pointed out. So if you're interested in discussing some of the challenges on software versus documentation, you click on that sign where it says software documentation and so on. So if you're interested in customer collaboration, you can click on customer collaboration. If you want to discuss how to respond to change, you can click on the sign where it says respond to change, and one of the facilitators will be there to help you with that particular challenge. So feel free. I'm just going to drag everybody because I can see some people who are not really facing the board, which is okay. Some people have been exploring. Probably they're facing the other way. That's okay. So click on the sign on the left that you think you're more interested in. So software versus documentation, customer collaboration, and respond to change. And one of us will be there.
Yeah, it's Pete here. These look all very familiar from work I've done at client sites. Most of it is semantic, which is the good news, but I think Simon said at the time, it's the one thing we learned from JP Morgan is that we were trying to do this at huge scales of 30,000 people. It just takes longer than we were, expecting at the beginning.
Okay, thank you, and sorry for the dragging. It's just that we would like to hear what the groups have been doing. So instead of asking one by one what they've been doing, what I'm going to do is I'm going to invite everyone to go to the place called Respond to Change. It's number 4. So Jonathan can share with us what they've been talking about. So number 4, list of places, Respond to Change.
Okay, good. I'll wait for everybody else to turn up.
Okay, we're all here, Jonathan. So if you
very
could
good.
please share with us
Good.
what you've been doing.
Yeah. Well, we there were a couple of things that we particularly focused on, and the first was the whole question of co-location, and that does seem to be a big issue. Just getting people together, the problem of communication, and the problem associated with not having co-located teams. The whole thing about Agile is it requires good communication, it requires fast communication and decision making, and when people aren't in the same place, that's a real problem. Then we spent the rest of the time really talking about this whole question of governance, which I think was really interesting because we had a couple of examples. Paul, you were talking about Agile, these kind of projects that are somehow, are they waterfall or are they Agile projects that are sort of hybrids? And there isn't really a governance system yet in place for dealing with those. So all projects are still going through the kind of project boards and the stage gates associated with Waterfall, and that's not really suitable or fit for Agile. At the same time, being able to develop a separate set of governance procedures is a bit of a challenge when the projects are a hybrid. And then we had I think it was Kirsten who was talking about the fact that your project has proceeded with governance in kind of abeyance. So you've really ignored governance as you've been developing the project because it's just been too complicated to do. But as you're getting towards the end of the project, you're starting to realize the shortcomings of that and the gaps. So clearly, I think Agile governance is one of the issues that's common to the group. And then finally, we talked about we were about to talk about the speed at which products were being rolled out, but we were then kind of dragged back in. So those were the areas that we covered, but some really interesting issues. I think the governance issue is a really fascinating one.
Yeah, it's Pete here. If I just sort of step in.
Hi, Pete. Yes, please.
the colocation is, I guess, the obvious sweet spot for this type of tool. It's not, not to sort of sound too much like a salesperson, but again, where you've got non-co-located people, if you've got the bulk of people in one office and one person on the Skype, it's very bad experience for that one person. Not only is it, it's hard to do the face-to-face, but it's also they won't have access necessarily to the physical material. So if you're using a stand-up board with lots of stickies, because 9 out of 10 of the team are in London, it's hard to use an electronic tool, but that person, the 11th person, cannot see it. So a tool like this gives you best of both worlds, where you can interact in a sort of pseudo face-to-face way, but also the material is persistent. It's there. It's not on a whiteboard. It doesn't get cleaned up on a Friday night by the cleaner, and you can go back and look at the history. So that's a huge advantage of something like this. And just quickly, the other thing is actually that the term we use instead of Agile is wet Agile, which is, I think, quite a good way of Waterfall and Agile. But the governance is a key one. I think I was talking to a couple of the groups just now around, you need to make sure your governance is, don't just transform the technology people. Think about the governance, think about funding. So you don't want an annual funding cycle for an Agile organization. You want to be able to quickly allocate funds from team A to team B as things change in the business environment. So you don't just concentrate on the software teams. The governance, risk and controls, and funding is a really key bits to get right at the beginning.
Okay.
Yes,
please, Robert.
Right. So the point about funding is it's really interesting, the idea of not being sort of a yearly funding cycle. That's really it's very difficult for us in government. Obviously, we go through we have to go through the funding cycles. It takes a ridiculous amount of time, and it's very painful to get through. And you get given the budget for the year if they sign it off. So we're sort of stuck with a fixed budget for the year, so to speak. But the way we're working in my program is we've got an agreement that although we might have a fixed budget for the year, we can basically move that budget as we see fit within the program to different sort of work streams and projects, whatever you want to call them, as long as we still aim to hit the benefits and the value we said we would hit in the year. So
you need to take a holistic view, don't you? That you're not funding a particular team or project, you're funding the whole enterprise, and you need to periodically check that the outcomes you're getting is justifies the funding at the macro level, not at the micro level.
Yeah.
Okay. So thank you. So let's hear about the other group, the customer collaboration. So place number 3, customer collaboration. So if we could all join them. Okay, we're all here.
All right.
So Simon,
Estelle has very kindly volunteered to take us through this board, so you don't have to listen to me, which is great.
Well, feel free to interrupt. So we started off on the top board talking about budgets being linked to milestones, a little bit on the bottom board about the government model contract, which very much wants to link supplier payments to milestones, and what a problem that can be, and that can sort of impede or stop a project in its sights. We also talked a little bit on the soft side and very much around not the team itself understanding Agile, but the people around the team having a better understanding of Agile. So that's from, in my case, our product owners don't get it at all, but senior management also looking at understanding Agile. And we mentioned about having a champion on the senior management board who did get Agile. One thing Simon briefly discussed was around one way that you could deal with having a very fixed budget is to not just link the cost of something or give the project control over the cost, but also over the profit. So therefore, if it costs more, it could lead to bringing in more projects and therefore more profit, and therefore that was one way of justifying increased costs. Certainly for me in the public sector, we're not allowed to make a profit. We just spend money. So it's finding a way of trying to measure that in terms of value as well. That
Yeah,
covers everything.
I think that's the challenge, which is, you know, where it's certainly in your environment, Esther, it's finding a proxy for the P,
Yeah.
some form of measure, you know, absolute measure of value that everybody can subscribe to. And if you can do that, it gives you a shot at it. But I recognise the fact that it is more tricky in the, you know, in a public sector organisation. But certainly worth something to think about.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, before we go to the next one, Pete, anything to add here?
No, I noticed there's an R&D sticky on the top right, which is really interesting. That if you've got a fixed timeline, that works really well. If you there's a framework called Cynefin, which some of you may have heard of. A Welsh chap invented it. It's the word habitat in Welsh, talking about different types of project. And if it's complex and complicated, then lean and agile work really well. If it's a very known problem, like just creating widgets in a factory, agile necessarily isn't going to give you the answer. Waterfall might be better. So a lot of software projects are complex, and so you might think it's a week task, but you get halfway through it and in fact it's a 5-week task because it's all brand new, it's a new operating system. So I think that's really interesting that senior people need to realize that, you know, certainly in the software world, you cannot have any degree of certainty until pretty much the project's done, which is a bit of a hard sell, but it's just the reality in the world of software.
Okay, thank you.
I mean, that's...
Jonathan?
No, I was just going to say, Pete, I mean, that kind of puts emphasis on the organization's portfolio management and
yeah,
you know, how good they are at differentiating between different projects. Yeah,
and that's why you want to do your risky things early, because you want to know very soon whether it's going to be 5 weeks, not one.
Yes.
So you do experiments.
Yes.
So yeah, I'm not going to go into now, but yeah, the whole agile thing is basically, this is the key thing, is that software projects and lots of different types of projects are very hard to predict. So rather than trying to predict and always getting it wrong, which is what we did for sort of 15 years, let's not even bother. Let's just do things very quickly, get very quick feedback, and pivot on, you know, as we go. That's really why Agile came about.
Yeah.
Okay, so if we can now go to the group 2, software versus documentation. And we're all here. So I'm going to ask Nigel, who also kindly volunteered to share. Nigel?
Okay, unsurprisingly, as others, governance requirements was kind of a key theme here in terms of organisations recognising how agile will fit into the current governance structures. Most of our governance structures have been based on kind of the waterfall delivery, so it's really understanding what can be collected, what data can be given to keep the kind of senior boards content and happy that the agile process is working, whilst not actually hindering the agile teams as they work. Certainly within my own organisation, that's been a challenge. It's improving all the time, but you know, it's an ongoing kind of involvement. I think the other thing was the actual tension between kind of agile projects as they start and waterfall projects in some organisations where they are operating both types of methodology. There is a tension between different forms of people who work on projects, those that have to produce the paperwork to meet all the requirements of a waterfall project, and the agile way of working. We also talked about the kind of misconceptions of what agile is, in terms of it's very easy for everyone, or managers or people who don't really understand agile, to just drop agile in, and people having different ideas of what that can be. There are, I think, as organizations mature, they actually understand what agile delivery is, and you know what it brings to the organization. So it's I guess we talk about you can talk about the preconceived ideas that agile is bad. That's only because people don't understand it. But equally, if people do have a small understanding of it and actually try to present it in a different way, that can also have a negative effect on agile, and gives the wrong impression about what it's trying to achieve. So I think the problem going last is you kind of forget what was said in your little session. I think that's what we covered, unless Deborah or Alison want to add any more to that.
That's great, Nigel. Well, I don't know, Alison, Deborah. I'm happy. Thank you. You've covered.
No,
Pete. And also Pete mentioned something. Anything to add here, Pete?
No, I think there's a lot of overlap. Obviously, governance is coming out from all three rooms, so yeah, interesting.
Yeah. Okay, so I'll give you some time to process before we gather again. So if we could all go to the place called Coffee Table, this will give us a chance to do some networking and discuss what we've been doing. Sorry, I made sure everybody here. So by clicking in one of those tools, you would actually sit. So pick a seat, click on it. Fiona, if you want to do the same.
All right, here we got Alison and
Click in one of those seats.
Yes, Fiona was a little late joining, Leo, so I don't think she was here for the beginning. But yes, Fiona, if you'd like to join one of the tables, just find an empty seat and click on the seat itself, and that will take you to join that group.
Sort of gently hear the background noise, but you can have a conversation around these. So it's just one of the features of the environment. So I tell you what was interesting is I think there was basically one overriding thing that came out of that session, which is it's the governance.
So for example, Fiona, there's a seat that I'm pointing at here. This table with Estelle, Jonathan, Paul, and Deborah.
how did you find that, both in terms of the sort of the QUBE experience and discussions?
And if you click on the seat itself, on the sort of red top to the seat, that will take you to it.
Yeah.
Should we just leave you two guys to it? You've worked together for years.
Let's just say, me and Nigel have been working together since about 2000.
Around this sort of this
Hi,
space.
Fiona.
Right.
It happened that you sat in a table on your own, so I came to join you. How are you?
Trouble we have is
We wanted to try and cover maybe too much
not
into
understanding Agile. Say they want to do it, say they want to buy into
I can't hear you.
but
I don't
also
know if your
can't
mic's off.
cope with the idea of not having fixed milestones, fixed deliverables.
Oh, you're on push
And
to
when
talk.
you go in and
Perhaps you
say,
need to
I think
press
everyone got
Control and
last
hold,
last month,
just like a
we're
walkie-talkie.
trying
Oh
this,
no,
we're
you
gonna
now
have
you turned it off.
discovery on this, and
Yes, so
work
press
on
here.
that.
Yes, can hear you, Fiona.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm guessing you don't have a headset. That's why I can hear myself as well.
Do you have
I can go and get my headset. If that
And,
helps.
and it's all very well when things are going.
I mean,
Everything's great when it's going well.
Is it
But as soon
something
as there's
you
an
could do
issue,
quickly? Because push
then
to
it's
talk
like,
is okay.
oh no, this won't do at all. And
Most things now we're not
it's,
Okay.
I thought
many
it
of
was
us
just
actually
working.
sit
Wasn't
in
then
the
I'll
same
push off
with
when
spread.
it's talking and then it should
Here
go
we go.
on.
it is.
So I'll draw a quick spin before we proceed to the final bit of, this is the final half hour of the session. I'll start from you, Alison. Any learning, any aha, anything to say, anything interesting or just a comment?
I'm finding the whole QUBE environment fascinating.
Oh, that's great stuff. Deborah?
Yeah, me too. I'm finding it really, really interesting and fun to actually work on those boards with everybody.
Okay, good. You're almost forgetting that I'm in a different country, sometimes in a different continent. Estelle?
Yeah.
Yeah, very similar. I can see how this could work. It's very interesting way of working.
Oh, Fiona? As you can see next to Fiona, she's on push to talk, but when she presses Control and hold, we can hear just like an walkie-talkie. Nothing from Fiona. Jonathan?
No, I've really enjoyed it, and I certainly learned something today, Leo. I mean, the whole issue of governance and what an issue that is with Agile. I had no idea.
Cool. Kirsten?
I really enjoyed the coffee space. As we said in our group, you often don't get that on Skype calls, so it was nice to have that time out to chat about things that may not be related directly to the task you're working on.
Okay. That's also called decompress. Sometimes our mental bandwidth needs it. Nigel?
I think it's been good to see that our problems are all kind of shared, maybe different flavors, but they're all kind of same type. So, but I think the whole QUBE experience, it's taken me a while to get used to it. But the more you get into it, it feels more natural. But it has taken a while to get to that point. Today.
Yep. It's a different way of working. So
Absolutely.
yeah, usually it takes 3 strikes you're in. That's what we say. So you see, the more you use, the more you take it naturally. Paul.
I'm fascinated to see and hear that we all have the same problems, or some of the same problems, and a lot of them seem to be cultural within our organisations. Also, QUBE, this is my second time using it, and it does feel a lot easier this time, a lot more natural.
Okay, you see, I'm not lying when I say 3 strikes you're in. Pete?
Yeah, I'm the same actually. Thank you for everyone's input, and it was interesting to see such a commonality between it. But in terms of QUBE, I must say when I first saw this, I thought, "Oh, this is a bit weird and wacky." I'm not sure it works, but having the persistent, I think we're going to see it in a second, having the persistent stuff up there forever versus stickies on a whiteboard in a room somewhere that always fall off. That's a huge leap forward, as well as the collaborative element, which we've done a lot of in the last hour. I think what we're going to see now is the bit, for me, that's the real sweet spot, is having this stuff up there forever and always go back to it, and wherever you are in the world is brilliant.
Thank you, Pete. Robert?
Yeah, the QUBE is interesting. First time using it, I was trying to, when I first looked at it, I was trying to think what it looked like, and it reminded me of Minecraft that my kids played. And it was, oh, okay. But yeah, once you're getting into it, I think it's really useful, and especially jumping out into the coffee table, the coffee area, that's quite good just to sort of sit down and have a chat with people. And learning that all of us have the same issues with Agile is reassuring, but also quite scary that it's been running for such a long time and we still have these same problems of governance, etc., that there must be a way of trying to resolve that as a bigger thing, especially if we're in governments. Obviously there's several government departments here. We're all having the same issues on governance and everything else. There must be a way of working collaboratively across all the departments to try and change that somehow.
Exactly. Thank you, Robert. And by the way, someone has once called us Minecraft on steroids. So I'll pass it over to you, Simon. I think there are a few things you want to share. I think it's over to you.
Can we go to can I ask everybody to go to the view presentation space? Just wanted to share something with you there, and then I'll give you a bit of a tour of the room so you can just get a better sense of where we are. So just click on view presentation. And again, just click on the yellow teardrop above the screen. It'll take you in so you can see a bit closer. So one of the things that we do a lot of in the QUBE environments, we do these cause and effect diagrams. So we call them bubble diagrams. I'm sure you've seen them before. And this is just something that I'd put together to really focus in on how could QUBE help with Agile transformation programs. So I'll just whiz you around it very quickly. It actually resonates with what we came up earlier. So we know that all organizations need to be great at change execution, but it's really, really hard to do. Very, very difficult to implement change in processes at scale. But we know we need great change management approaches if we're to be successful. And that's where people start to settle on Agile could be the solution that we need. Generally, we start with a pilot. The pilot works great because we've generally got a bunch of enthusiastic people who want to try something differently. And then there's a couple of things that happen. As we start to scale up the programs, we've put in place our Agile transformation program, and then suddenly geographical and organizational barriers get in the way of making it easy to collaborate. And I think it's important to point out both geographical, so we've got dispersed teams who are trying to work in a highly iterative agile fashion on a daily basis. And then you've got the organizational boundaries which get in the way. So we're great, we're all operating as agile, but if all the processes around us are still stuck in a waterfall fashion, it starts to get very, very nasty. And then we're back to the same problem, which is difficult to implement change at scale. Agile gets the blame because it seems to be the thing that's changed. Then we coined the phrase, Agile becomes fragile. And a lot of organizations, they can their transformation programs and they they go back to the original ways of working. The other loop is, and I think we talked about this before, we have a great pilot and then management get unrealistic expectations of what benefits will be realized when. Progress seems to be slow, so then the organization starts formal tracking of milestones. Teams then start hiding the truth because they're worried about getting fired because the program's not going as well and Agile is not delivering the benefits. The increased transparency starts to lead to team resistance because they're all really worried about their jobs. That then leads to individual reticence about how this is all going for the individual. And that culminates in organizational resistance to the change and somebody who's always been the naysayer saying this has to stop, Agile's not working, and you get back to where you were, which is Agile becomes fragile. So this is really the origin of what we've been trying to tackle within the QUBE environment, and really focusing more on this, which is how can we help break down some of those geographical and organizational barriers to improve collaboration where you've got large and complex organizations. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually do what we try not to do on QUBE, is I'm actually going to drag you around to give you a sense of the room we're in and point out, some of the things that we've developed, that hopefully that will resonate with you. I think Leo just bringing up, I don't know whether anybody's read this article. If you haven't, it's a must. It's a guy called Stephen Denning, and it's the 12 stages of the Agile journey and how people sort of slip up along the way. So if you haven't read it, I would definitely encourage you to do so. It's very therapeutic if you're halfway through your journey. So with that, I'm just going to get everybody to now follow me. We're going to go to a place called Birdseye. Sorry for dragging everybody into the ceiling. So the idea behind this room is that it is a room which everybody within who's contributing to the product can actually operate. So this main room here, this is the product owner's space. It's where you can do all team stand-ups, you can do the presentations as we've just shown, and it's got all of the product owner's collateral. And then you've got a couple of Scrum team rooms that you can see here. You clearly set up as many of these as you like. So this is the room in which the Scrum teams would operate. And then you've got a reception in the middle where you all entered the room. So what I'm going to try and do is give you a sense of the product owner's space first. Okay, so first off, we start with our vision board, and the underlying concept of all of this is exactly as you've already experienced. So it's all about sticky notes. But to Pete's point, everything is long-lived. You don't get rid of everything. You keep every piece of collateral that you generate. So the idea behind the vision space is that we can define our product goals, our target customer, the customer needs, so on and so on. And the beauty of this is you can get everybody in the team to contribute to this. So if somebody's got a good idea about the product goals, they can add that at any time, and you can see who's added it, so that the product owner can then have a conversation with them about what they were thinking. If we move to the right, now you've got your strategy area. So we've got our vision now. Let's start to turn that into, okay, what's my business case? I can start to develop a high-level roadmap. What are my main delivery of value statements going to be, and who are my key stakeholders that I need to make sure that I keep up to date, keep engaged with the project. I'm going to move to the right again. Now I've got my backlog space, so we can start to do our backlog creation. So we start off with an unprioritized backlog over here, with our epics and high-level stories. What do we think is going to be in the next sprint, and then what have we got actually in the current sprint? You'll notice in front of each of the boards there's a sort of a different coloured carpet. Those are sound zones. So if you actually go on to those sound zones, you can have a private conversation. So if you want to work on the backlog and there's lots of other people in the room, you can do that because you can't hear them and they can't hear you once you're standing on the carpet. So I'm just going to swivel everybody around, make sure that everybody's on the carpet so you can hear me. We've then got an ideas board. So this is where we start to capture customer feedback, feedback from the sprint reviews. So these are the ideas that the product owner can then take a look at and decide, is there enough value that I'm willing to take that and put it onto my backlog board over here. So think of this as the scratch pad for all ideas, again, that anybody in the team can then contribute to. We've then got a team board where you can basically put up all the members of the team, and then key here you can actually see. I won't go into it because, but there are like pre-formed posters where we can use to document the team and key what their skills are, because what you want to see is across the team, where have people got a depth of skill that you can actually draw on, which you might not necessarily know about. So this is a great place to come if you want to see, you know, who's got expertise in machine learning and so on, so that you can then start to draw on that expertise for something that you're working on. Then we've got the product backlog refine board. So you would use this to do story splitting and the like, so that as you start to move stories towards the current sprint, you can do your refinement on this board. You'll notice down the left here, you can have as many of these tabs as you like. So to the extent that you're working on a refinement, you want to go away and come back to it, it doesn't get removed. To Pete's point, it stays there forever. You can also see on the right hand side here, we've got a little dot voting kit. So if you want to do some estimating, you can use that for doing planning poker. You can obviously use it for getting a sense of what everybody thinks is the next big priority. Moving on, then you've got a sprint planning board. So this is where we would say, okay, what are the big stories for the sprint, and who's going to pick those up? So you would ask each of the Scrum teams to come here and volunteer to say which of the stories they're going to take into their next sprint. And again, it gives the product owner a sense of who's got what. Then we've got a retrospective board. Again, we can do these via sprints. So classic retrospective, what went well, what could we do better, and what actions can we take out of this? And often what you would see is the actions then going onto the ideas board for the product owner to decide whether they want to take those onto the backlog. And then on the sprint review board, this is where you'd start to pick up the feedback from the product owner when the Scrum teams present. I'm going to do a sharp right turn. We've already covered the bar stool, so this is a great place for individuals to go and have conversations about a particular problem or challenge they're facing. You've got the presentation space, so you can put up PowerPoints, you can show documents, you can do free format drawing on there if you want to. So a great place to do all team stand-ups. And then in the far corner here, you can see we've got a more casual zone. There's a library, bookshelves, so you can store, collateral about the project you're working on, as well as Agile reference materials. So you can see here we've got a set of Agile artifacts in the far right bookcase, and you can take private copies of those if you want to. I'm going to take you into the Scrum team room now. So as I said, we'll all crowd in, bit of a squeeze. So I'll come back a bit. So this is where the individual Scrum team would operate. So again, you've got your daily stand-up board. So a great way to capture what did I do yesterday, what am I going to do today, what are the blockers that I need help with. The sprint planning board is basically what this team took off the product owner to say, what are we going to work on? And then if I spin you all around, then you got the Kanban board. So this is the the sort of the meat of the room, which is what's on the to-do list, the in progress, and then what have we done. And you can see down the right hand side here, you can color code your stickies so that you know who's picked up what, who's working on what. And then finally, if you look on the far wall, you've got a retrospective board for the individual Scrum team. Over here, I've got a small television so you can do presentations for the Scrum team. And then you can put posters on the wall so the team can put up here whatever they like. So you can see here what to expect of your Scrum Master and what not to expect of your Scrum Master. So that's a lightning tour of the of our Agile space. The idea behind this is that it doesn't matter where your team is in the world, where your product owner is, where your Scrum teams are. You can basically operate as if you were all in the same space, and anybody can get access to the the product collateral or the the Scrum team collateral just by wandering around this room. And equally, to the extent that everybody's operating in this space, it's really easy to go and have a conversation with an expert in a particular piece of technology or or business that you've gathered from the team board.
Okay.
So I realise that's a bit of a lightning tour. Happy to spin, Leo, just to get,
thank you.
Any
Well,
thoughts.
actually, before we're spinning, one thing we always do in those QUBE at work is we always want to improve them. And again, today was about showing off a bit this agile cubicle because we put together thinking about the agile needs. But we go to the place called learning. Again, we've been to different places. There's one of them called learning. So if you could all join me there. So if you could right now, by using stickies, I'm keeping an eye on the clock, so we still have 5 minutes. What was your biggest surprise? What do you think you've learned? And if possible, how do you think you can use? By now, I think we can ignore the ones at the bottom, the group favorites. But yeah, lots of stickies coming. That's good. What have you learned? What is your biggest surprise? And then we'll gather just in a moment to the circle. Give you a few more seconds. I know it's under pressure, but let's try and finish on time.
One thing I should have pointed out is so QUBE is an entirely virtual organization. Many of us have never met physically. We operate entirely virtually on QUBE, but this is our office. So we are on here all the time. If you want to go and chat with somebody in their office, I can go to Leo's office for example. We can work on something. It's basically 2 clicks away in order to do that. So it's the way to think about it is it actually can become a complete way of operating, and especially if you're in an agile product where it's reasonably ring fenced, it is very useful for that sort of thing.
Okay, so if you could all join me at the gathering circle, so we have a final spin. So Alison, I'm going to start from you, and then quickly, one-liner, everybody, final words. Alison.
Just food for thought on how we could take this forward with the team.
Nice. Deborah?
I've really enjoyed this session. I think that it's an incredible tool, and I just want to thank everybody for facilitating this session.
Estelle?
Yeah, I found it really interesting. Need to have a think about how I could make it work in an existing project, which already has a lot of different tools. but definitely food for thought. And I enjoyed our group discussion. It's interesting. A lot of us are hitting the same issues. Reassuring in a way.
Good. Fiona?
So yes, this is my first time on QUBE and it's incredibly interesting. I have no idea how our team would receive it, but I definitely want to present it to them.
Jonathan?
Yeah, just a couple of things to say. First of all, if like me, your experience of QUBE, the first experience of QUBE is amazing, and you realise that you can develop rapport with this strange avatar, this strange QBot, and so when you're working together, the sense of trust that you have with this is extraordinary. The second point is just an advert for our next session, which is on the 15th of August, in the QUBE at Work cubicle, which is a slightly different cubicle from the Agile cubicle, and we'll have another 90 minutes. But that time, on the 15th, we're exploring the language of project working with Carol Osterweil, who's coming to co-facilitate that for us. So if you'd like another experience on QUBE, then please do come back for that.
Nice, thank you. Josh, is there anything you want to share with us?
Yes, so we've just done a bit of calculation estimating what we've saved by meeting today on QUBE instead of meeting in real life. And I can tell you that by doing that, we have saved 3,671 miles of travel. So I'll put that in a bit of perspective for you. If we had traveled, we'd driven or flown, it would have taken 4 hours each. We would have burnt up 1.8 tons of carbon, which could be used to heat and light a house for 130 days, so over 4 months. We would have spent sort of £700 on the time that we lost in travel and £1,700 on the travel itself. So in total, we would have spent nearly £2,500. So that's how much we've saved today by meeting on QUBE. So well done, everyone.
Well done, everybody. That's nice. Yeah. Paul?
Yeah, I found it very enjoyable. The interface is easier this time, and your carbon figures may be slightly off because you're not taking my 100% electric vehicle into account.
Nice. Pete?
Very good. Yeah, thank you everyone for their input. I've certainly learned a lot. I think the overlap of the issues that people are facing is certainly very interesting for me in a key world and also in a sort of consulting world. So I'll be having a think about that and talking to the folk within Deloitte.
Thank you. Robert?
Yeah, it's been first use of QUBE, very interesting, and I like the way you can sort of go off at the coffees and talk. The interactions over here, and it's really good to see that everybody else is facing the same issues I am with governance, especially on agile projects. But yeah, very interesting. Be interesting to see if I could actually try and use this back at base.
Nice. Thank you, Robert. And finally, Simon.
Yeah, great fun. Thanks, everybody. Sorry we overran slightly, and apologies for these being late sessions, but it's the only way to get people out of busy day jobs, unfortunately. And if anybody wants to know more about QUBE and how it might work, feel free to contact any of us. Josh, DW, put you in touch with the right people. But we'd be happy to talk some more. Yeah. Okay.
Okay. Cheers,
Thanks,
everyone.
everybody.
Bye.
Thank you.
Happy you
Bye.
can jump.
Bye.
Spacebar.
Thank you.
Yay.